What's going on, family? Listen, I'm gonna come to you real quick. I know the debates are coming up. I am not going to take a long time. I just wanted to hit this really quick because I know it's going to be next week before we, have a moment to have a conversation again. So I wanted to get to this really, really quick. I wanted to get to this gerrymandering thing. And something else I really kind of been thinking about, fam. I wanted to kind of have a quick, what's up, fam? What's going on? How y'all doing? You enjoying your day? Surprise. So we got to get to the debate. So I'm not gonna go too long, family. But I wanted to talk about something. I think most of you all, there were different takes on this gerrymandering decision. There were people had different ideas about it, and well, we don't want the Supreme Court to make the decision because the Supreme Court is a partisan, whatever. Some people said that, and that was this article, and we had this one. The Supreme Court just said federal courts can't stop partisan gerrymandering, and how bad that is. So for those of you who may not have seen it, for those who are just kind of catching up to it, I just want to read a couple of quotes from the actual from this Vox article, because they've been doing really good pieces in terms of like what a thing is. Not in terms of opinion, but what this thing is. So partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of federal courts. Chief Justice John Roberts, joined by the court's other four conservatives, wrote in the 5-4 common cause decision. Federal judges have no license to reallocate political power between the two major political parties with no plausible grant of authority in the Constitution and no legal standard. So what they're basically saying is, listen, we don't know, like there is no standard to set in terms of when something gets too political or too partisan. We don't know. It is what it is. We can't say, we can't call it. And my thing is, like, there has to be, I tend to fall on the side of, well, there has to be some type of guideline. That's kind of what you're there for. That's kind of why you're the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court hasn't been the Supreme Court in a long time. We haven't had that kind of justice in a long time. And it kind of made me think of tokenism and black politics. And I'm going to get right back around to that. Just let me just frame it a bit. So here's a couple more quotes, just so we understand one another. Federal courts still have the power to strike down maps to dilute the voting power of racial minorities, or maps that violate the one person, one vote principle. Supreme Court precedent in both areas is well established, and Thursday's decision did nothing to change that. But did it? Because here is the other question. There is a fine line giving the voting patterns of black people. There is a fine line between when you talk about, well, it's a partisan gerrymandering versus, well, it's a racial gerrymandering. Kind of when you vote Democrat, it's kind of close to the same thing. And this is what happened. This is kind of how we got here. So let me just read this next quote. Its latest development in a saga that spanned nearly a decade. During the last round of redistricting in 2011, North Carolina Republicans adopted a new map that heavily favored the GOP. Opponents filed suit, arguing that the map was drawn to dilute the voting power of black North Carolinians by packing many into just 2 of the state's 13 districts. Eventually, a majority of Supreme Court justices agreed, finding that this was an unconstitutional gerrymander. An unconstitutional gerrymander. Okay, so that's where we are. So, here's the workaround, though. You got to talk about the workaround. But North Carolina Republicans had what they thought was a clever solution. In redrawing a new map rather than focus on race, they make it even more GOP favorite map by focusing on partisanship. I propose that we draw the maps to give a partisan advantage to 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats. One state legislature involved in the map drawing said in 2016. Now, why am I bringing this up? Why am I bringing this gerrymandering conversation up on a day that ain't even our day to talk about it? Because I was thinking about something. It kind of brought to mind, and you can agree, we all can agree to disagree, but it brought to my mind this book. This is an old book. And the book was written by London Guinier after, I think she put together the essays that were used to call her the quota queen, even though she wasn't in favor of quotas. And Bill Clinton, even though he had been to her wedding, old Slick Willie and Hillary decided that they wasn't gonna be friends with her no more. They weren't gonna talk to her no more, and she was not going to they had nominated her for what she was going to do in the civil rights what was it, assistant attorney general or something, whatever. They had nominated her over there. She used to work for the legal defense for NAACP, I believe, and they kicked her to the curb because that's what you do. So it made me think about something, though. If you go into the book, there's something very specific that I think there's a chapter that I think we kind of have to focus on. There is a chapter called The Triumph of Tokenism in terms of black politics. And when I saw that today, I just started thinking about it. I just started thinking about like gerrymandering and tokenism and how what we have isn't necessarily black politics in terms of an agenda, in terms of legislation that's actually benefited us. What we have is representatives who are kind of drawn into black districts, but they don't have power. And how it would kind of be better if like you would have more, you would have what she calls kind of proportional representation. So I just want to read a couple of things as we talk about this, because we got to talk about this in terms of how much did we get wrong? We got a lot of stuff really wrong. And it's not just who we elected. It's about the whole process. So as we talk about gerrymandering, I want us to kind of consider this going forward. Like, I'm just going to do a quick video because I want us to just think about this. Like, this is a video for us to just think about what to do going forward, an exploratory theoretical video, so that we can think about what this means, because it ain't working for us. The way this is going is not working, so we have to figure it out. And it's not just about getting more black people in office, because that's what we've been trying to do, focus everything on electoral politics and the electoral processes, and it seems that that way of doing things isn't necessarily working out. And even in terms of fixing ADOS, what I see a lot of people saying is, well, we just got to get them, just got to get more of them in there. Well, we're always a minority. So you have what she kind of talks about is in this tyranny of the majority, because you don't have any representative, you don't really have representation. You just always lose. And the people that you do send there, you're kind of sending them there to have, you're kind of voting for, the best way I could describe it is you're voting for group identity as opposed to group politics. You're voting for, as opposed to a group agenda. You're voting for group politics in the belief that this person that you're voting for, because of who they are, has a commonality with you that they will be able to put into effect when they get there. And I have not seen that happen. And I think the data points to that has not happened. So let me just read to the. It says this is in the roots of black electoral success theory. By focusing narrowly on electing black office holders, however, the litigation strategy and the theory eventually eclipsed the movement's wide-angle focus on transformative politics. So instead of really focusing on the politics, what we ended up doing was we ended up focusing more on like getting the right people elected as opposed to effecting what we needed to effect. And then the question becomes, how possible is that with the kind of democracy that we have, alleged democracy, because I don't know that it really is. How do you effect that? Because this doesn't seem to be working. But let me just give a couple more quotes. In general, black political leaders would temper the rhetoric and overt racism of white elected officials. Even the black president didn't do that. Somebody jumped up at him. He wasn't the ADOS president, but somebody still jumped up at him and yelled, "You lie." So that's out the window. In particular, black representatives would, by definition, constitute a progressive force affirmatively promoting black interests. No, they promote, let's think about this, what they've done. Because they don't have real power, they end up affecting the interests of Democrats like Pelosi and others, not the interests of the people who put them there. So they don't end up affecting necessarily and pushing forward transformational politics for our interests. And we saw them as our leaders as opposed to elected officials. We saw them as, we have gotten these people elected, these are our leaders, as opposed to on the ground or political education or a transformative political agenda. But that's still only part of it. So let me get, black elected officials thus ensure black voters a voice in the process of allocating government benefits. That's what we thought, but we still, no. That's what we thought. Yet within contemporary voting rights jurisprudence, mere political control of black voters over their representatives has come to satisfy the Act's conception of representation. So what does that mean? Issues of voter participation, effective representation, and policy responsiveness are omitted from the calculus. Let me read that one more time. Issues of voter participation, effective representation, and policy responsiveness are omitted from the calculus. Omitted. Third, majority rule was unquestioned as long as the majority admitted a fair number of blacks into its decision-making council. So what does that mean, Yvette? That means you get a seat at the table, but you don't get no food. You get a seat at the table, but no food. So you have your representative at the table, but they don't get any food to eat because they're not really effecting change. They're not influential in that way. And I think of that in terms of gerrymandering, because you can paint all black people into one place instead of just having them be the critical votes in 3 or 4 districts, instead of cutting it up in a certain way to where they are the critical vote in a few districts, or at least 2 or 3. You get one rep, or you get in this one little space and you get cobbled together, which dilutes your power statewide and in those districts. So you don't influence. I mean, would you rather influence the vote in 3 separate districts and be a swing vote or whatever? Or would you rather have one district and one representative who is always going to get reelected and is lazy? Like, you have to think about this in terms of proportionality and in terms of how gerrymandering has worked and how it has set up everything. Let me just read this last thing. Black electoral success theory has 2 major failings. First, the theory abandoned the civil rights movement's transformative vision of politics. In that vision, the purpose of political equal opportunity was to ensure fairness in the competition for favorable policy outcomes, not just fairness in the struggle for a seat at the bargaining table. In addition, legislative responsiveness would not be secured merely by the election day ratification of black representatives. Rather, legislative responsiveness would depend on citizen participation, legislative presence, and legislative success in meeting the needs of a disadvantaged group. So what does that tell you? It tells me that we never had effective representation. And it tells me that America, in terms of how they have constructed this democracy, this majority rule, if majority rule and there is no proportionality, isn't that a setup where the minority always loses? In this case being us. Especially if you are this kind of minority. Like you're not a sub-minority, meaning where, see, the thing people miss is that if you're a gay white person, you're still a white person. You're still a part of a majority group. But what happens when you are like a bottom caste and you are totally set apart from the group in every way imaginable? Your history, your lineage, your caste status. We have to understand and really think about what this means and what have we done this whole process wrong in terms of this process gerrymandering and how we've been doing it has created a group of tokens who look like politicians and representatives, but really do not represent us. They have jobs, and we have viewed their election, and we have viewed their integration into the political process as our win. So we have viewed us having a congressional black caucus and people who represent us as our win. And we have said to ourselves, well, we must be doing something wrong if they can't do it. We have not set ourselves apart and say, well, maybe they're not the bar. Maybe inclusiveness in the process in terms of these people who are part of our group as representatives is not the same thing as a democracy where we have power and influence. And a consideration in terms of what can be done about that. Because this is winner take all. And we're permanently outnumbered, right? So does that make us permanently excluded? We've been here 400 years and it's kind of looking. It's getting very suspicious. So I think those are, I think Lonnie Guinier mentioned something about cumulative voting and proportional voting, but I think that is what we have to kind of think about, because what happens is these people rule on behalf of us, but the only thing we ever get for the most part is kind of the pleasure of being ruled and seeing something that is a reflection of us in that. And that's not just their fault, although it is their fault in terms of how they behave when they get there, but that is also the fault of the structure and how the structure is set up and how the structure is allowed to kind of navigate. So I'm not going to do a full show tonight, fam. I just really wanted everybody to kind of, really consider that. I really wanted everybody to really consider that and consider having a seat at the table with no influence at the table. And the rise of, and what that means. And what that means when you get there and you are a representative and you realize you don't have any influence, right? I mean, you realize that, because the influence comes from the people. See, the influence that you do have, everything that we've ever had comes from a movement, comes from a push from the ground up. It doesn't come from you sitting in that seat. And see, what we've done is we've given up that whole thing where we push from the ground up for transformative power consistently over time. What we'll do, we'll push for a little while for one thing, and then we'll drop it, not understanding that we have to have an agenda that we push for all the time. So even if you are there and you're a representative and there is no ground, and you may not even care because you're still going to get your biscuits buttered, but you'll still get your check and you realize nobody's behind you to light your fire. It creates this laziness and this benign neglect, even from the people that you elected to look like you. And because that's really what it is. You elected this cultural affinity or racial affinity under the guise that they would operate on your best behalf, not us understanding that operating on our best behalf is based on a kind of specific political foundation and a grounds up approach to politics. Not we're in there, we're represented, that's who we are, because those people, that's still a minority, and that's still like the Guinier book, The Tyranny of the Majority. So it's a very specific political problem. And I just wanted to come on. It's going to be about time for the debate soon. I just wanted to come on for a little while because I want us to start to think about what that means. We're going to do the debate. Antonio and I will discuss the debate tomorrow on his show. We'll do a recap. I'm about to get ready and go watch it too. So we'll go do that. I just wanted to come to you all for just a few minutes and discuss that. And, I kind of want to know what you think about it too, because those are some real oppressive forces. And so you have to think about the advent of tokenism as let's cobble all the black people together in one little district, give them one person and no power in any other area except for this mostly black district that they occupy. And how if you could rewrite that differently, where you could be a swing vote in a lot of stuff and be represented, you could be represented proportionally in a few districts based on how that district was cut up, how that would change power within states and districts. So just think about that. It's just something to think about. I wanted to talk about it really quick before we got to the debate. And fam, we will talk again soon. Appreciate you.